So I've had a lot of people show some interest in talking about the spiritual world, and since there's so many layers to this topic, I thought it might be worthwhile to just have one resource on YouTube that people could go and watch in segments. So you can follow me on TikTok and on Instagram where I break these things down into small snippets, but I thought, yeah, we'll just go ahead and put everything that I can think of that's come up recently into one long form so that way people have access to that. So, first of all, about me, I grew up in a very spiritual New Age household. I talk about this a lot. It's very much tied to the root or core of my purpose and values and why I'm walking the current path that I'm walking. I'm the bearer of my family lineage and a spiritual tradition that is partly based on Tibetan Buddhism combined with Toltec, Carlos Castaneda tradition. So our family was raised in the tradition of spiritual work and the idea, or with the idea, that spiritualism is a form of work or practice in which you have the ability to cultivate your mind's capacity to journey into realms beyond what is readily available to the five senses and to the physical manifestation that we experience as the tangible material world. So you could think about this in a sort of more practical, um, strictly mind oriented or thought oriented way, like creating a thought palace or mind palace, right? So from a practical mindset approach, this would be like the Silva method or mind palace creation, where you're basically using your attention and intention to be more focused in the type of reality that you're creating and the type of thoughts that you're experiencing. This is like mind over matter stuff that the working off of the idea that the things that I think and the things that I focus on, what I choose to give my mental energy to, is literally creating my perception, which is now sort of a commonly accepted paradigm that thoughts create your perception, and your perception, therefore, is what is, it's not necessarily, or this is arguable, your perception and your experience and your sort of mental psychospiritual bubble may or may not be directly influencing 3D matter. I sort of lean towards it has to be at some level. Why? Look at the way that atoms function or cells, right? If you look at subatomic or cellular level, even though there's a wall that exists between cells, that wall is a filter of communication and it is constantly interacting with, exchanging information with everything that's around it. And, when we take that principle and we apply that to the macrocosm, it's not really possible for us to, nothing exists in a vacuum, right? A vacuum is basically something that is a theory or it is one of the ways in which matter um, is transformed, right? Like through a black hole, which is a vacuum, a hole in space um, and time. We don't really understand how those things work, but we do understand the concept that this exists, right? So we understand the concept of a vacuum, but in the conceptualization of a vacuum, we have to acknowledge that there is nothing that we can experience or know or think that occurs in a vacuum. There is no thought that you have ever had in your head that isn't in some way tied to the people, the experiences, and the time and space that you experienced over your lifetime. It's just, it's not possible. You're going to be influenced by the life that you've experienced up until this point. And for that reason, once you make a conscious decision that you want to change something about your life and you focus your energy on that, and you make decisions every second of every day, every thought that comes, you you bring that the lens of your desire of what you want, you bring that lens to that thought and say to yourself, is this thought in alignment with what I said I wanted, a month ago, 5 days ago, yesterday, whatever? Is everything that I'm doing and being and thinking moving me towards that goal? And that is what coaching does for you. When you hire a coach, that's an accountability partner. That's someone who helps you regulate and helps you understand and helps you stay on track. And that's why coaching works, because you have that outside person to sort of, put the bumpers on for you and just remind you, like, hey, you know, yes, you're chasing this, relationship. You want this person, you want to be in a relationship, blah, 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 blah. I'm using a personal example from my own life because I have a deep desire to be in partnership, but I've chased a lot of duds. I've kissed a lot of frogs. And when I'm really honest with myself, what I really, really, truly want for myself and for my life is to provide for my children, to move towards my goal of providing a safe container for people on this path, and to grow my business. Um, Finding that perfect person, that perfect partner, is actually not on that list. And so that was kind of something I had to, wake up. I had to be my own coach in that and recognize that having a partner is something nice, and I would like that, and it would bolster these three things, or could, and that would be wonderful. But if I really want to get right about these three things, then I have to kind of let go of the sort of searching and longing and questing and holding out for and holding the candle for, especially specific people. That's something that I had to release. And so this is kind of what we're talking about, making decisions and then having the self respect and the honor for yourself to align as much of what else is going on in your life towards those decisions, or trimming the fat off when those things are not in alignment. So, what does all of this have to do with the spirit world, spirit walking, remote viewing, spiritual work, and that that ilk? Every single time that you make a decision in your mind with your intention, and then you reinforce that intention with your attention, meaning that you're constantly bringing those thoughts and you're constantly, realigning and redeciding and making those commitments to yourself over and over and over again. This is not easy stuff. This is really hard work. You have to constantly decide every single thought, 1,000 thoughts a second, right? You have to stay on top of yourself and monitor yourself. The amount of personal power, and we talk about this. This is referenced in the Lessons for Living, which is available for purchase on my website. It's something that I talk about quite a bit. Personal power is basically the inversion of ego. Ego is an attachment to things and stuff, an external representation of sort of who you are and what you identify with. Ego is always wrapped up in things like external validation, trusting other people, um, trust issues with other people, um, you know, power dynamics, which is huge in our society right now. We're um, sort of unpacking and unraveling this power dynamics thing, and as we start to release this as individuals and as a society, the opportunities to work in the spirit world are going to increase and increase, because we're not going to be so hyper focused on the external materialistic side of things, as much as we are now. We're not going to have that same need to achieve material success and further validate our ego, because ego requires um, there to be a materialistic hierarchy. And when you start doing spiritual work, you recognize that the hierarchy of the spirit world is already fixed and in place. And as a conscious entity doing work, you can experience all the different levels of this hierarchy with your conscious intention while still sort of holding space for yourself as you are in your place, in your role in the dynamic of the larger creation. So we'll get into more of that. It's a little lofty or ambiguous for some people, which is fine. Anything that doesn't make sense to you, my recommendation to you is try to watch this video once all the way through, or jump to the sections that you like or that resonate with you. And then in, a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, revisit this whole video and try again to listen to or absorb the things that either maybe you thought they made sense, but when you hear them again, it's like rereading a book that you love. Every time you reread that book that you love, you're picking up on things that before maybe didn't seem as important or as relevant. When you go back through, you're like, wow, I don't even remember reading this before. And it's so meaningful to me now. This is the same, you can recycle and reuse and revisit material and information over and over and over again and find something new. And part of the reason for that is that we're constantly evolving. And the way that we're evolving, one of the ways that we're evolving right now is that we are starting to wake up, most of us unconsciously, to the fact that we are these multidimensional beings. So all of creation exists by a layering, a series of conscious, divine conscious layers. So the biggest layer, the biggest container of all of everything, what it comes down to is basically what is and what is not, right? There's this great Peter Gabriel song, and he talks about this. It's called "Growing Up," which is from the album Up, which is a great album. And if you've never listened to it and you're on a spiritual journey, go sit down with that entire album and listen to it from beginning to end because it's great. But so he talks about this concept, right? The first impetus of consciousness, let's just call it that, um, we would liken it to like the Big Bang. At some point in time and space, everything was one. That is the principle and basis of monotheism. Ultimately, there is one thing, and we are all contained by it and swimming in it and breathing it, and we are all it. There is nothing that can't be that one thing. How you choose to articulate and define what that is kind of is determined on your cultural background, your religious beliefs, your own spiritual beliefs, and your own experience. So I really like to call it the great mystery because I think it sort of encompasses the unknowable aspects of what's beyond the beyond. I don't know. There has to be some edge to something, right? Or does there? I don't know. Like, it's so big, it's so broad, it's the ineffable. And one of the words for capital G God is the ineffable, right? It's the mystery. We don't know. To claim that we know is the height of human arrogance. It's the height of human ego. Why do we kill each other? Why have we ever killed each other over religions? It's the most nonsensical, illogical, unloving, ungodly thing that could ever happen, ever. When I was 5 years old, I woke up to the realization and the truth that to kill another human being because you disagree on who has the more correct opinion over something that no one could possibly understand, speak to, or know is the height of human cruelty. And one thing that's I've heard recently that I really like um, is that what we think of as evil, or bad, or wrong, or whatever you want to call it, evil, right, is just whatever is the most distant from the source of the divine. So another word for this sort of ineffable is source. And some people equate source with the sun, which I don't think is necessarily wrong. But the sun is a solar deity, and we'll get into that more later about the deification and animism of the material world, and sort of how the sun is related to that, and the sun behind the sun, and sort of all these things. But suffice to say that you could think of the spirit world as a big layered cake. And we in the material world are sort of, I would say, the most central of those layers. And that's just sort of how I think about it and perceive it, because to me, it's like, the most dense material incarnation of spirit is going to be um, at the center. Like, it's the heaviest, it has gravity, it has substance, And then to me, I think of, the more ethereal things as sort of beyond and outside of. And so that's why I think of it as like, or like an everlasting jawbreaker, right? Or even the way that we think about the earth, which, is it true? Is it not true? I don't know. I've never been in outer space. I've never actually seen, is the Earth flat? Is it round? Is it a disc? And I've certainly never been to the core of the Earth myself, so I couldn't tell you if our whole concept of, the semi-molten, and then the fully molten, and then the iron ore core that's supposedly scaldingly hot but super cold. Who knows, right? But when you see that sort of um, that slice, the bisection of the earth, and you see these layers, right? That's kind of how I think about the spirit world. And I think if you look into Rudolf Steiner, and others who discuss this topic, I think that's a pretty common observation or assessment. And so when we're talking about spiritual concepts, um, personally, I consider myself um, a so for years I was part of the Unitarian Universalist Church as a youth, and I was part of their youth ministry, and did leadership programs through Unitarian Universalism. And one of the things I really liked about Unitarianism, and it's both, right? Unitarian means basically that it's all one. So they're a monotheistic base, which even polytheistic religions, almost all of them have some element of monotheism, because it's sort of commonly recognized that there is one substance, there is one baseline. What that is and how we explain that, I think, varies quite a bit. Um, like I said, it's unexplainable. So okay, what does it matter? Um, but there are many different ways to kind of slice up this pie, or this layered cake, and think about and have relationship with each one of these layers, right? So if I'm relating to the Godhead in a monotheistic standpoint, then I'm talking to what I would call the ineffable, or the great mystery. And I would say, um, great mystery. Oftentimes will say things like all of creation, because to me, creation comes from the one source, which is the ineffable, the sort of um, the blackness that contains everything, the is that is not, and the sort of mystery of things, right? The next layer down from the one is the two, and the two is when we start to get into the dual aspect of the Godhead, and that's where we start getting into Mother, Father. Um, that's really where the is and is not layer is. Um, uh, Light and dark, any kind of dualism that you can think about, that is where that layer is. Okay, so there's the one, and then there's the two, and then there's the three. And the three, I liken to, and it's commonly interpreted as time. So in Hinduism, they have the triple god, um, and each one of those represents um, creation, uh, the sustaining aspect of God, and then the destructive aspect of God. And in sort of modern Wicca, you have the maiden, the mother, and the crone, right? The new life, the bringer or sustainer of life, and the old wise woman who is in her declining state, but yet she has cultivated this wisdom. So for me, the three layer really has to do with the aspect of time, the deification of the cycles of creation and of life itself. In his song Growing Up, Peter Gabriel says that four is about building. So I think once you get past this sort of, is it a monotheism? Is it polytheism? Is it how many gods are there and which one do I follow? And am I good or bad based on whose opinion and which god's opinion matters? Um, I think once you get past three, then you're sort of into polytheism and animism. And really, I think that when you open your mind and your reality to hold space for the idea that all of life inherently has an aspect of divine creatorship, divine, all of life has an autonomy to it. And think about it. If you just think about it from the most logical standpoint you can, as my kids are doing their autonomous play in the background. Every single incarnate being that you know, including every plant, every insect, every pet you've ever owned, every person in your family, every person you meet on the street, every person you work with, every person that you encounter driving in your commute, literally all of us. We are all autonomous and individual. We are also all profoundly affected and enmeshed with our environment and the consciousnesses that we interact with, both on a regular basis and sort of tertiarily through our community and the people we sort of cross paths with. And then, you know, in the greater reality, of course, we're also affected by the decisions of our government and world leaders. And from an energetic standpoint, we are all always affected by the macrocosm of experience and the microcosm of experience. And when the pandemic started, um, I went into a deep isolation. I was deeply depressed. I was, anyway, I was in a not great situation and was trying to make the most of it. But sort of as part of all of that, um, started meditating on the darkness that was in the world. I've always been very sensitive from a young age, like I mentioned before. At 5, sort of opening my eyes and saying, wow, there are human beings, individual human consciousnesses out there in the world who are 100% not just willing, eager. They are eager to kill and die for something that they could never understand. They're willing to take life and take another soul with them, in many cases, into the unknown with the karmic debt of having killed that person and themselves, supposedly to honor or attain something from a basically imaginary figure. I needed to understand how that level of darkness could so easily consume our world. Um, Fear is a very powerful motivator. When we understand fear in its most simple terms, fear is about whether or not you're safe, how likely it will be that your individual expression of consciousness will continue, how likely it will be that your family's expression of consciousness will continue. Um, Fear is one of the best marketing tactics and strategies that exists even still to this day. And it's something that I've researched as well in connection to marketing. I went into psychology and in school, and a lot more than you think. If you're not in the world of clinical psychology or research psychology, you don't realize how insidious, how much money, how much really good, hyper intelligent, well meaning individuals go into the realm of psychology with the intention of helping people, because we really only pursue and are passionate about the things that we ourselves have been either troubled or plagued by. I wouldn't be talking about these things if I hadn't gone through the valley of hell multiple times trying to have full responsibility for my relationship with the experiences that I have had in the past and continue to have in my life, which is seeing and witnessing and experiencing things that to other people, most people, would seem ridiculous, ludicrous, insane, or delusional. So fear, fear drives us, and for every layer of human consciousness, for every layer of of consciousness, there is a vibration, and the vibration of fear has a particular, it attracts and feeds a particular type of consciousness. And there are disincarnate beings who live in these sort of shadow realms. Maybe it's purgatory. Um, Names are weird, because as soon as you identify or name something, it's kind of like you lose sort of the understanding of it, because you're trying to label and categorize and rationalize things, and that's one thing that fear does to us is it wants to control a situation. So we get our safety from feeling in control, knowing that we're safe by having control of a situation, and our multi-leveled desire to categorize, label, confine, restrict things. This is a normal function of the brain. The brain naturally wants to categorize, put things in boxes, and understand them. Unfortunately, that part of our brain has been allowed to take the reins of our society as well for the last several decades, maybe a little over 100 years. Um, and it's extremely dangerous because what happens is you have all these little boxes. It's a great song. It was the theme song for Weeds, little boxes, right? Like we're all sort of in these little boxes, and if you're not don't totally fit in those boxes, which no one can, then there's two things that happen. One is the parts of yourself that don't fit in the boxes start to atrophy, and they become shadow pieces of your personality in the sort of multiverse of who you are. So these are basically like the lost children of your identity. They become neglected, they become spiteful, angry, then vindictive. Like, think about what happens to, a child or an animal that gets neglected. It becomes fearful, it becomes um, self-protective, it wants to survive, but it doesn't have the proper tools to survive in a healthy way, and so it becomes maladaptive. And so we have all these fractured pieces of ourselves that we sort of, push under the rug, and pretend that they don't exist so that we can have the social external acceptance of, yes, I fit the box. Um, it's very dangerous and it's very damaging. And part of what's happening with the Age of Aquarius, and people, they talk about 5D and this light ascension and all this stuff. So the Aquarius is the water bearer, and what does a lot of water that's poured over a surface that is already existing, what happens? There's a flood, there's damage, dams break, things get washed away, the ground becomes resurfaced. Poured over a long period of time, the terrain will change, the river will run in a new place, and these types of things. So you could think about it. A lot of energetics is um, using metaphors as a literalization, or using literalizations as metaphors. So sometimes when we're thinking about energetics and we think about words and language, language is another form of compartmentalization. And so we sort of build these structures with the language that we have, and those structures become our prisons. And in our brains don't really know the difference between if I'm seeing and interacting with something with my eyes in this material world, or if I close my eyes and I imagine in my head, or I dream that I'm interacting and doing these things. Our brain, um, that that sensor that picks up the information from our ocular nerve, it can't tell a difference. And these things I'm talking about are all proven by science, and I strongly suggest that if you're either a staunch skeptic, like I sometimes am, or if you're interested and curious by these things that I'm saying, please go do the research, because one thing that's happening, and they talk about this with, like the myth of Atlantis, right? Atlantean technology was completely um, the spirit technology and the scientific technology were not separate. And that was one of the great um, lessons of the parable of Atlantis, is that when you have that much applied knowledge and you don't hold to the moral codes that are necessary, and this, it comes down to just one. It's really just one moral code, the highest reality for all beings. When you resonate and connect to the highest reality for all beings, you can do no wrong, because you are simultaneously praying for yourself. You are simultaneously praying for everyone in your family. You're simultaneously praying for even the people who are doing wrong in this world, who are highly separated from divinity, and they're in the shadow world, and they're working in the shadow world, and they're creating more, making the shadow world larger. And we'll maybe talk about that as well if we have time. Um, this is all my time. This is all my time right now. So we talk about whatever we want. Um, so the highest reality means that I I do as I will, and I harm none. Will harm result from my choices if I am aligning with that thought. Maybe, maybe it's possible. But I lead from the intention of I wish to harm no one. I may all my efforts lend to the highest good of all creation. And another one that I really like, and this is not mine, but it's something that I started to pray a lot at the beginning of the lockdown, is may all beings be free. So basically, we are these multi-level, multi-dimensional beings, and most of us, like maybe at a less percentage now, because I think a lot of people have been painfully disillusioned about the material world and the shadow world that's sort of manipulating the material world and has been, um, that we're not quite fully as illusioned as we once were about separation. So our world is built around the illusion of separation. We come as a spiritual entity, we come to the material world to experience separation. Because in the spirit world, everything is, there is no real space. Like we think of air and like air of all the space. It's actually not true. There's, molecules everywhere in the air. And if we had more, we're pretty naked as animals, so we can't really feel. We don't have the same sensitivity. We have a different type of sensitivity if we choose to cultivate it. And one of the ways that we can cultivate it is by reducing our fear. And the way that we do that is by sort of not being quite so over focused and attached to this material existence. So you think about it, 80 years at best, about 80 years on average for most of us. Some of us a lot less than that. And we don't really know, no one really knows how much time they actually have. So when you think about the timeline of the earth, the timelines of the universe, and then you think about 80 years, that is a really short amount of time. It doesn't fully make sense that I am born and I die, and then me as whatever I am just is erased and no longer exists. It's probably not likely. I'm not saying I know, but I can tell you that I do have memories, impressions, sensations of other times and places. Some people call it past life regression, past life work. I used to be super fascinated by stuff like that, not so much anymore. I think it's way more important that we consolidate, and this is sort of the point that I've been coming up to. When we accept compartmentalization, we are accepting um, enslavement. When we accept that someone else's projection of reality and who we as individuals are supposed to be, we are absorbing and assuming that other projection as our own. Every single being that exists in this world and beyond is an individual and pure expression of divine consciousness. I could walk off into the woods right now and I would be an individual divine consciousness. I don't need society. I don't need my family. I don't need any any other being to tell me that I'm an individual divine consciousness, because when I am alone, I'm still there. If I was so alone, as to be in the wilderness for as long as I could survive alone. I would still have thoughts, I would still dream, I would still have experience. Now, would I be meeting bugs and wild animals, and would I have conflict with, other apex predators, and would I, yes. So how alone are we really? Again, we circle back around to this illusion of separation. There isn't really anywhere where you can be alone, and yet we're profoundly alone, right? We come here to experience individuation of our divine soul consciousness. That is why the illusion of separation exists. And that's also why, at some level, it cannot evaporate. So I'm speaking to people right now who have come to a spiritual tradition because of pain, the pain of separation, the pain they've experienced in their lives, in your life, in my life. Our pain has opened us to something else, something to solve, S-A-L-V-E, solve, to soothe my pain. And oftentimes when we do that, we're actually opening ourselves up to things that we don't fully understand and that might not necessarily, that it's part of our lesson, which will ultimately lead to our healing. So there is no wrong or right answer, and that's also troubling, right? Because I feel like, the devil would say, you won't run to the light unless I chase you, because otherwise it's good enough. If you're in good enough, if you're in complacency, why would you run the narrow path to the light? It's the demons chasing you that makes you run to the light. That's the devil's argument. It is the job of the shadow of the devil in us and in our world to provide the context for the light. There is no, are there evil acts? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's an unconscionable amount of trauma and pain and suffering being inflicted on the innocent in our world. I believe that a lot of that can and should change. Innocence is something that should be protected. Part of our coming of age and coming into ourselves is tied to the trauma of being separate, being alone, and feeling victimized. And so there is a piece of that that is true and necessary for our lives. There's a great podcast that Aubrey Marcus did recently, um, and I can't think of the name of the gentleman, but he's about myth and story. And he talks about the rite of passage. And if you look at our culture, what is our rite of passage in Western culture? The rite of passage in Western culture is trauma and victimization. And it's not a clear, hey, when you're 15, you're going to have a traumatic experience and you're going to have your rite of passage, and every one of us goes through this and it's just like this and this is how it feels, and you're going to be an adult in the tribe after that, and it's systematic, it's formulaic, it's clear. It's not. There is an element of danger or unknown or risk. There, you have to interact with the fear. You have to encounter the fear. And in traditional cultures, that's done in a very formulaic and safe container that the whole tribe has gone through. And so there is a sense of community out of the individuation. So you move into individuation, you encounter your shadow, You encounter your fear, and then you return as a new person to a community of people who have had this experience. And they talk about this in the podcast. It's a great one. I'll link it into the video below. Um, we in Western culture have been robbed of the human technology. I personally believe that it was done intentionally, um, at some point, at some juncture. Um, I do teeter into the sort of conspiracy theorist camp at times, but to be honest, if you really look and you really examine the culture, and you really look at, economics and history, and you can, you know, there's all lots of people talk about this stuff, so we don't have to unpack it into the nth detail. And honestly, I think it's a trap. Again, it's an overinvestment into material facts and data that you cannot control. You cannot, I am not going to take down the secret societies that have been governing our world since, before World War I or whatever. Um, but what I can do is, and a lot of other people do, is to sort of say out loud what it is that is supposedly so secret. And this is one of the things. There are worlds upon worlds upon worlds upon worlds. And in each one of those worlds, there's sort of a version of you. Or mm, you can you can visit, you can be a tourist in those worlds. And it's done through your mental projection, your soul projection. It's done through remote viewing and the psychic work. And so again, this stuff is pretty out there, um, but it's coming more into the common vernacular and the common culture. And I really resisted a long time talking about these things because ever since I was a child, I used to see ghosts, um, the past, like, when you go to a place and you just feel something, and then it will be just for a flash for a second. It's like I'll see people walking in period costumes, like just, and it's not something that you see with your eyes, right? It's something you see with your perception. Um, so now let's talk about how does that feel? Because so right, so I was completely immersed in the spiritual tradition. My teachers were very much about expanding the mind, the spirit, and all of these things. And what happened was I became very disconnected with sort of who I was in the material world. Like the material world was so dark, ugly, painful, uncontrollable, and uncontrolled, and full of people who were unconscious and doing unconscious harm and sometimes conscious harm to other beings, especially when I was young. I was very sensitive to the culture of meat production. I became a vegetarian at a pretty young age, then a vegan, um, and it's it was highly sensitive. And part of the sensitivity is that you have to protect yourself, especially when 90% of the culture would lock you up in a padded room if you were like, I see things. It's way more common now, and so it's a little safer to talk about these things openly. And it's just time. It's just time now. We weren't really ready as a species before. Um, we a lot of us have been prepared for this work, and we've been doing this work, and our parents have been doing this work for generations so that we could be ready to talk about these things more openly. And so that's why it's happening now. And I follow a lot of people on social media, and I know a lot of people ask these questions and research these topics on their own. But for the last 5 to 6 years, a little bit longer, I've been pretty much working on developing my body awareness, my sensitivity of my body, um, cultivating strength. I am a apprentice martial arts instructor under my instructor. I've learned all kinds of things about the body, and we call this embodiment. I consider myself an embodiment coach. For a while, I was trying to approach more people who were interested in personal trainers and yoga and martial arts. I was trying to approach people in that way with that offering. And recently, it's been pointed out to me that I actually need to circle back with the people who I can more help, and that's people who are more like I am, which is people who are highly sensitive, who maybe sometimes don't feel comfortable in their bodies or in the material aspect of reality, people who still struggle um, with judgment. And that's the point I was going to bring up earlier is sometimes we find ourselves in a spiritual tradition because we're running from the demons, we're running from the darkness. And then we get to a certain point in the light field of where we believe, not only are we safe in the container of this belief or this faith, let's just use Christianity for example. That could be anything. Um, I maybe I'm someone who, became a born again Christian again and rediscovered my Christian faith, and I have was so driven out of fear to run towards that and to find that safety in that I then turn around and start target practicing on all of those demons and everyone that's on the other side of the fence, right? And that's where you get into sort of righteous indignation, judgment, or divine judgment, and the holy fire and all of these things. And people really, it's so easy to do. It's to get stuck in the duality of it, um, us versus them, wrong versus right, light versus dark, angels versus demons. Um, there's a great battle coming. It's the apocalypse. Oh, it's always the apocalypse. Since 2012, it's been the apocalypse many times, many times. And here we are again. It's the apocalypse. Guys, I was just talking to my really good friend about this. Duality is is the core foundation for all of material existence. So if you want the war of the angels and demons to happen, and you want the angels to win, and you want God, there's a reason why at the end of that story it talks about everyone rising from their graves and seeing God, and God's there, and that everyone's in heaven now. It's because if that ever takes place, then this material plane doesn't exist anymore. Maybe that is maybe that is the evolution, and maybe that's why, that story exists in the Bible. Maybe we are, you know, s- um, snapping away from and back to the singular point of origin of source, which I would liken to the Big Bang. And that is more than likely how the universe works, right? We expand, 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 expand into infinity, And then at some point we reach critical mass for how far we can expand. Um, and then everything snaps back into a singularity again, and the whole thing starts again. Now, the Earth has been resurfaced and recreated many times. Lots of things, everything that we know of in creation works in cycles. So it's not such a stretch, but I don't know. And as far as they can tell from what they're measuring, and again, here we have science that backs up the spiritual side, the universe is getting bigger, and we have no idea where the edge of the universe is. So, astronomy seems to confirm that everything will just continue to expand. But those are big topics, and there's really no point right now to worry about that because we have so much work to do already here and now on this earth plane with humanity and our relationship to all that is. We don't need to explore the oceans. We don't need to go to space. We certainly don't need transhumanism. We are putting the cart before the horse all the time, civilization. We are rushing like a rocket into things that we don't understand. And that is one way that we learn. And there's nothing wrong with that. But slow and steady wins the race. We can go really fast and really far and learn from our mistakes. And or we can go step by step and develop ourselves gradually so that as we progress, we're able to hold and contain and understand, integrate that knowledge. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 2 years for my own personal development. So now let's talk about the somatic experiences. So why embodiment is so important. In order to have your so what the human is. The human is a projector and a receiver. We are antennas. We're sending out information and we are receiving in information. We integrate, process that information, then we respond and send that out. And a lot of people are stunted at various parts of this communication or this relationship with the all in all because of our trauma, because we've been robbed of human technology. You know, we don't, these are not things that are common necessarily in our society, how to develop ourselves in these ways. So, what embodiment does for you is it clears you out. It clears out your ability to perceive and receive because you are processing the trauma and you're releasing the tension in the body. And what happens when you receive it, think of it like a wave in water. When the wave comes in the water will naturally translate the wave just through inertia. Boop, 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 boop. It's translated. If you're standing in that water, as the wave comes, it goes, oop, something solid, and it starts to go around. And that's what happens in the body. The body is, well, 75, 78% water or something like that, mostly water. So when we have tension and blockages in the body, the energetic waves and frequencies that are coming from source, from everything that's out there, including the divine source, right? Because information is still coming from that one, that unity, that central point, which is everywhere and nowhere, right? and it moves and ripples down through the layers of creation, through the layers of spirit, into the layers of the material world, first into the air, which is very easy to translate through, and then through water, which is second most easy to translate through, and then through denser matter, which is, the hardest to translate through. And if those vibrations hit your body and they start to ripple, 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 first through the skin, right? Um, and then through the denser layers. When you meet with tension, it's like it hits this wall. And as a perceptive tool, your body is now going to give you mixed signals about what it's receiving because it's getting information from source, from divine all the time, and from your environment, and from, your, am I safe? Is there danger? Is there food there? Is there a friendly animal there? Is whatever, whatever's going on. And then it comes through, and then your body's like, ooh, but that hurts. Or, ooh, that there's a wall there. And I'm moving my shoulders because like that's where all my stuff tends to stick, is kind of in here. And so as I'm talking about it, I'm like, ugh. So what embodiment does is it starts to help us unwind all of that stuff so that as we're experiencing things that come both from our core and center out as information that we're sharing so that we can be our most divinely expressive selves, it also opens us up to perceiving and interpreting more cleanly. I don't want to say correctly, but cleanly through the filter of our mind, body, spirit system and our ego, because the ego really is the personality interface between you and everything else that is, because we have to have that separation, right? And the ego is what gives us the sense of separation. And I, me, and you are you watching this, and I don't maybe know you yet, or maybe you know me and you're interacting with my ego because my ego is my personality and how I look and how I wear my glasses or like how I'm touch my hair certain ways, or you can tell I forgot what I was going to say, so I'm a little anxious sometimes, or whatever that is. um, and in yoga, in yogic philosophy, this is not an uncommon notion. um, the idea of I would like to position, I would like to suggest that as practitioners, as yoga teachers, meditation teachers, both in our practice and as instructors, that we stop talking about dissolving parts of ourselves, so that we can become more closer to the divine, or less attached, or whatever that case may be. And I would like to suggest that we start talking about integrating our multifaceted selves and coming to know those different people who I am when I'm interacting with different people, because I'm a different person. I'm a different version of myself in every relationship that I have. I'm a different expression. I'm a different coalescence of myself in every situation. Sometimes that warrior, that hard, you know, I'm a MFer and, whatever, come on, bring it on, whatever, 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 like that tough guy, tough girl persona, needs to be there because for whatever reason, maybe it's just that's the day I'm having. And that's okay. I think we need to kind of hold space also for others and say, oh, I had this friend, a really dear friend, who I still have so much love for. And if she ever comes across this video, I hope she knows how much I truly love and appreciate her and the time that we had. But um, one time she said to me, I was doing some real hard, hard guy act with her. and or said something about somebody and was like, yeah, thuggish, right? And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, that's just not you. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be like that. She sees me as you know, I'm looking at a picture of myself teaching a Kundalini yoga class from teacher training, which is on my um, YouTube channel picture. And, that's the persona that she identified with and connected with and that she loved. And she didn't really have room to accept or acknowledge that that tough MFer is also part of me. I am also a monster, and I love my monster. My monster has kept me so safe, so safe. And I've been in some bad situations and I've made some really bad choices. But really, um, nothing really bad has ever happened to me in this lifetime. Um, Not physically. Psychospiritually, yeah, I've gone through the ringer, but you know, um, I have been well protected, and part of that is that limbic brain, the fight or flight, the monster, the one that comes to protect you, the negative mind that's, am I safe? Do I belong here? And at some level, I have never felt I belonged here. So I've always sort of been on guard or on edge, especially with people, because it's like I had to hide some part of myself. And that hard version of me, that monster in me, stepped up and said, well, I'll protect you. I'll keep you safe from everyone. And also made me vulnerable to identification with other types of monsters and for lack of a better word, demons. Because demons live in the realm of separation. It's a demon's job, it's the devil's job to keep you away from everything that connects you back through the knowledge of unity. And it's a dance. In this life, it's a dance. If you are in a human body, you are doing a divine dance with creation. And I think it behooves us all to acknowledge and recognize at a deep somatic level that we are both angels and demons, and we are surrounded at all times by both angels and demons, if that is a definition that makes sense to you. If not, scrap it and define it however you choose. But understand that if you are an incarnate being in the material world, that we are living through a gradient of experience. And sometimes we are in the more refined gradient where we're in mind and we're in spirit and it's lofty and it's beautiful and whatever. And sometimes we are in the more separate, more material, more fearful, more self protective, more combative, argumentative, the need to conquer, the need to know, the need to assess and judge. Um, and this is cut up and divided up in so many ways. And one of the ways I really like is in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Because it's sort of a very practical breakdown of when I'm up, then I'm dealing with, my sense of purpose and the higher level thinking of things. And when I'm not up, then maybe I'm concerned about my connection to others and whatever the case may be. And then when I'm really low, then I'm down here worried about, am I safe? Am I going to be fed? Am I going to be sheltered? And those things. Um, when the vast majority of people in a society are living in the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, You will have an entire culture of people who cannot see the higher realm. When you have a vast majority of consciousnesses who cannot see into the higher realm or the spirit realm, then those who can will have more influence and more authority and more mobility and more capacity to move about, manipulate, and create within that world. And that, my friends, is why I think we need to really look at and bring home our awareness of that there's more to life than the material. If you choose to not see something and not believe in something, that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you. If you choose to believe in a paradigm in which you have minimal understanding, zero control, and very little connection, but you believe everything that comes out of that paradigm, you are giving your mind and your ability and your responsibility to creation over to someone who doesn't know you, who doesn't care about you or your family, who has an agenda of their own, who has their own shadow side, their own fear of survival, and who will do anything in their power to do what they feel is right in their limited worldview. The people who are behind our government and the people who are the scientists and the experts and the whatevers of this world, the people who are pushing culture and society forward for the last, let's just say, 75 to 125 years, are not operating from the position of the highest reality for all. They are not operating from the position of may all beings be free. They operate from a self-perpetuating paradigm of fear. They use fear to manipulate others because that's their experience. They're afraid and they know fear works, and so that's the tool. It's like having one hammer in your toolbox, and every time a job needs to be done, no matter what it is, you're like, well, here I have this hammer. Let's keep using it. And, we're the nails. And we keep being, we're the screws, we're the nails, we're the staples, we're the, whatever we are, everyone has a role, a place, and it's not meant to minimize anyone, but, you are not God. You're not even a demigod. You're a human being. You may have affiliation and connection, and you may have a guide, and you may have a whatever, and you may have a posse and a team in the spirit world. Lots of people do. Um, but ultimately, we're responsible only for our little electromagnetic slice of our incarnation at any given time, and to a lesser extent, the people that we're closely related to, our family and our close friends. Those are the things that we're responsible for. But we keep seeing that hammer and we keep going, yeah, that'll work on me. Doesn't fit me, but I still believe it works. And so come on with the hammer, you know. The problem with that is that the more of us that consent to the hammer, the more hammers we'll have in the world. It's that simple. The more we say yes, the more we're building that reality. And for many hundreds of years, and especially in the last couple of years, um, there has been a move to create a larger pocket of a larger, this is where things get hard. It's hard to talk about things like this sometimes because the words, what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, it doesn't have a place in the material world. It's not matter in the same way that we experience it on day-to-day basis. So sometimes when I'm trying to articulate things like this, it's like my tongue will get heavy and the right word won't come. And I'm a word person. I'm a writer, so this is very frustrating for me. But yeah, I guess a fun challenge. So um, think of it as like any species, right? Um, a species will naturally expand into the container that can support it into its environment. So humans, for example, we have made the earth more agreeable to support more human life. And we've done that by, killing off other competitors, um, changing the landscape, changing the land, growing more of the food that we like to eat, um, cutting down trees to make room for cities and dwellings, to make the earth more hospitable for more humans. The same thing is happening in the spirit world, but for a long time now, and with a strange urgency, it seems lately, um, and especially right around the beginning, about 2, 3 months after the global lockdowns started. Um, it's like, um, okay, so fear fear has a vibration, and it's a food. It's an energy, and energy is a form of food. So there are entities that eat and feed off of people's fear and misery and despair. Um, and as a natural process of any evolution of any species, they're going to try to proliferate and create more of that food. And so we have a heightened, and I'm sorry to say, blood and death, and specifically murder and violent death, also is a part of that. Because when people die violently and in tragedy, their deaths, their energetic signature and their frequency has a particular flavor. So this demon realm, the realm of these beings, has been expanding. And early on in the pandemic, I got the impression that these beings have made some kind of agreement with certain humans who are doing their work in the spiritual world. Not everyone who does work in the spiritual world is well intentioned. Um, that's why it's really important that people who are innocent and well meaning and who don't want to do harm to anyone but just want to live their lives peacefully and take care of their family and do good work and these types of things, humble people. Y'all, we gotta wake up. We gotta wake people up because right now Um, there is a monopoly, and it's not only a financial monopoly, it's a monopoly of spirit and essence. And so there's a few things you can do. The first and foremost, most important thing that you can do is to start to isolate and identify and signify for yourself when fear is in control, when fear is driving you, and when you're in a state of uncontrollable misery, despair, fear, or depression. So, in those moments when you are totally consumed by negative emotions, fear, whatever the case may be, picture golden light around you. There's a few ways you can do this. You can picture it coming from outside of you. Some people equate it with solar energy or solar deity. So they'll bring it from the sun's light, golden light that comes. White light also works. This is one of the most basic light worker light worker technologies is to work with the golden light or the white light. Some people are able to imagine it coming from their heart center. In Chinese medicine, you can imagine it coming from the lower dantian, which is the downward pointed triangle that sits in the middle of the pelvis. Um, for women, I equate it with the womb, which is very powerful, and maybe we'll talk about that and unpack that later on a different series. But uh, golden light, and you surround yourself first, and you're inhaling and exhaling as you're doing this into the bowl of the belly. Okay, so one of the things that fear will do is fear will capitalize on the weak points in the body. So other places of trauma, this is why embodiment and somatic work is so important, because the fear that you experience on a day-to-day basis, the insecurity and the fear that comes naturally as part of just being in the unknown of creation, which is always, okay? Um, the fear response to that will start to stick and coalesce around the places that you have unprocessed trauma. And these are the stuck shadow places inside of you where you have stored your fear to protect yourself so that you could do work and move forward and live your life and do all the things that you needed to do. Well, these are also the places where we're most vulnerable to attack or infiltration from lesser forces. It's really, really important that you do your work to become strong, sensitive, open, competent, and capable, and to understand what it is that you're feeling, why you're feeling it, where it's coming from, and if it's yours or not yours as you're starting to do spiritual work. Because I've talked about this as well before and not really unpacked it fully. So for those of you who are watching, hopefully this answers some questions. And if not, reach out to me directly or comment here or on my Instagram or wherever you can find me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. But um, we have to develop confidence and competency at every level, at every manifestation of ourselves across multi dimensions. So I need to feel confident in not only my material body, but also in my organs, on the inside of my organs, how my organs interact with each other at an energetic level. And I'm not saying not everyone needs to go out and study Chinese medicine and understand organ balancing and blah, 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 all that stuff. But I do need to understand that when I ingest something that's not necessarily good for my body, that I'm going to be throwing my system out of balance for a little while. And so I might not have as much resistance to things or be as strong in certain situations or whatever the case may be. And again, it's a dance. There is no perfect picture, there is no perfectly right answer. It's this, the whole, all of creation and incarnation is one giant experiment, one giant play, um, in the sense of divine play, not in the sense of William Shakespeare saying all of life is a stage and all the women and men are merely players, as in that this is all farce in a way, which I believe, yes, there is a level of I believe that real reality was shared through the work of the person named William Shakespeare. And that, again, is like a whole other thing I would love to unpack at some point. Um, if people are interested in that, definitely let me know in the comments. Um, but we need to grow up, we need to step into our power. This is the time right now. And if you're watching this video, it's probably been your time for a little while and you're weeble wobbling around your center. Get in the body and start to tell yourself the things. There's this great song. I can't remember who it is right now. It's a pretty new one. And she says, look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself everything that you want to hear. And this is the time for us to do that. We have to stop looking at the external world for our validation and approval and make decisions. We must make decisions now about who we are, where our boundaries are, where our edges are, and we need to start calling back to ourselves the pieces of us that have become fractured, the, the parts of us that we've allowed to atrophy, um, the 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 entities and versions of ourselves that exist sort of in the either in these other worlds that we've created in order to survive in these other realms. We have to call those versions of ourselves back and coalesce into the here and now, because it's only in the here and now that I can affect any change. And the more I am able to create a positive feeling within my electromagnetic field, which you do by calling in the golden light, the white light. There's many other techniques, so if that one doesn't work for you, please reach out to me and let me know, and we can talk about other projections, other mind projections that you can use to start cultivating and building that energy for yourself. Um, but so you create the safe space within your electromagnetic field through golden light, white light projection. You create and cultivate a clean and clear and pure heart space the same way with golden light, white light, green light. The green cross, right? Christ consciousness is really popular right now, which is beautiful. Um, as long as we're talking about Christ consciousness and we're not talking about the satanic biblical Bible. And again, more on that later at some point. Um, and then after you have cultivated that, then you start to call in um, the pieces of yourself that are fractured, broken, atrophied, neglected. A lot of our a lot of our unconscious pain and projections onto others, our judgments, our trouble in our interpersonal relationships, um, our our defensiveness and drama and karma with other people. You got this one friend, and I really love this person, but every time we have this conversation, I can't talk to them anymore because then they just don't get it, and they're blah blah blah, and they're really backwards, or they're really lost, or they're whatever whatever whatever. Every time that happens, you have to look at it as a mirror, because what's happening is that is an atrophied piece of you, that is a shadow that is being called up, and it looks and acts and talks like that person in that situation, but in actuality it is part of your projection that isn't very difficult for you to see, because you have rejected, abandoned, abused, neglected that that think of it as your child and you've been a neglectful parent. That piece of you that's your shadow is some rejected, abandoned, dismissed part of yourself. And let's say it's something really bad. Um, let's say it's a desire to hurt others. That's that's bad. Like I want to hurt other people sometimes. Like I physically want to hurt other people sometimes. And maybe you have that person in your life who, everything is hunky dory with them, but then when they get angry, they hurt people. And the warrior, the the warrior, the embodied, empowered, enlightened warrior response to that is to recognize that the reason that that person hurts people when they're angry is because of their own shadow and their own, usually they were hurt in the same way. They're following some kind of template, right? And as a warrior, we train so that we can encounter that person with confidence and not hurt them, right? Like I I know how to fight. I can fight. I developed that in myself because part of the reason was because I was so fearful of being physically abused or assaulted. I wanted to be able to walk out into the street as a single female and not feel afraid. And I knew that. I, 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 I cultivated that and I knew that. And so I worked on it and I worked on encountering that fear. And I also worked on my own primal desire to control others through physical violence because that's part of our limbic brain system. Uh, I I would hesitate to say that any human, any incarnate human would not have this quality at some level because it's a template. It's a pattern of the human brain development. The human brain is developed in part for violence. And I think when we, as a culture or as an individual, when we act like that's not, do we want to carry violence into the future? No, I don't want to carry violence into the future. The one surefire way to continue to carry a trait into the future is to um, allow it to atrophy and ignore it, reject it, try to make it small, put it in a box, make it controllable, bury it. What are you doing when you do that? You're planting a seed. And what does a seed do? It slowly grows over time and becomes something bigger and stronger and more. So these are the cycles. These are the patterns. And when you start to step back and zoom out and look at the patterns that exist everywhere in your own thinking, in creation, cycles of creation, in culture, in human evolution, in the evolution of any species, right? When you start to look at the patterns, then it's like, okay, I can choose something different. So now, instead of trying to demonize and vilify and bury and kill, it's like we're taking our emotional violence and we're trying to kill physical violence with emotional violence. So I'm sorry, but if you're someone who's so angry at guns and the people who want to own guns because of things that have happened that you have no control over, that gun owners, the general population of gun owners, have no control over, that politicians have really no control over. You can you could you cannot control a person. You can lock them up. You can punish them for the things they're going to do or that they've done. You can remove options from people, which is what incarceration is. You're removing options from people. But you really cannot control that person. You can't make them think what you want them to think. So the only way, and this is not me, this is something that's been said, it's something that we know. It's a known thing. It's in the zeitgeist. It's in the world already. The only way to change something that I don't agree with, don't like, whatever, it's not to attack it directly, but rather to change my relationship to it. My electromagnetic field, and to a degree, my close relationships. That's it. That is the limit of your influence, except in prayer and when you start to develop your spiritual techniques and your ability to expand your consciousness into other realms and other realities. For example, I can pick someone that I care about and have a strong connection with, and I can close my eyes and I can bring that person into my awareness and allow myself not directly to imagine what that person might be doing, but allow myself to feel, to listen, to deeply listen to everything that that person is, just for a second. So close your eyes and take a deep breath to your belly. Try to release any stress and tension from your upper body. Get in a comfortable seated posture and just take a few minutes to relax, or a few breaths to relax. And now think about someone who loves you and you love them, or you have a strong bond with that person. And try to either think about your going to where they are, but especially for new people starting out on this work, I prefer to think about bringing, like, you're seeing them really far away and then you're zooming the lens, right? Like um, you're out pinching, right? You're zooming on them. So you picture them in your mind's eye and then you start to bring the image bigger and closer to you. And without thinking or knowing, you may know their schedule and know what they're doing. Without assuming anything in your mind, just take a moment and think about listening to them and feeling them and see if you can pick up on anything, an impression, a smell, a look, maybe what they're wearing. Just sort of allow it to wash over you like the wave of an ocean. Just feel it. And then say thank you, I love you, and then you undo the whole process. So you zoom them back out, put them back wherever that was, where they came from. Or if you went to them, which is um, a more risk inherent technique. If you're not experienced with remote viewing and spiritual projection, astral projection, whatever you want to call it, I highly recommend that you stay in your body, in your electromagnetic field, and try to bring things closer to you, rather than taking your essence of soul and going away from your body and your electromagnetic field. Part of the reason why is because, especially as we're starting out in this work, we are opening ourselves up, which makes us more vulnerable. And as we're processing our attachments and trauma and the shadows that we have, we're also working to dissolve the things that are not ours. Um, and it's very common for people who are sensitive, who haven't dedicated themselves to clearing their energy and doing this work. It's very common to have, it's almost like they're leeches, um, or to become possessed. And I'm not saying any of this to scare anyone. And a possession, we see demonic possession in scary movies and stuff like that. Um, it can be a lot more subtle than that. You can be, you could be possessed by a desire for cake. So you're like connected to the embodiment of being fixated on eating cake. And now you're attached at some level to like every entity that ever lusted after cake. you know this is kind of, this is just an example, but so very important to work on clearing your energy, building the golden light around you, and then subsequently cutting cords. And cutting cords is just exactly what it sounds like. You're going to you can use your hands and sweep around your field. If you're Wiccan or pagan or into magical works, you can use the Athame, which is a white-handled spiritual knife, um, which I've shared my own several times, and would be happy to again if people are interested in magical tools and things like that. I can share that. But basically, you sweep your field, especially back here. The brainstem and the limbic brain system operates back here. So it's very common to have attachments in this area. It's also common along the side of the body, the front or back of the hips, um, pretty much anywhere you have like a power leakage, deficiency, or any numbness. There's a place in your body where, for me, it's my lower abdomen. I have a lot of like, I still have a lot of unconscious and numb cells down there from having two C-sections and um, hating my body and hating being overweight and that those thought forms carry a lot of negative energy, and that negative energy is stored in the body. There's also a technique which I can teach you now, which I think, looking at my feed right now, I guess I don't have it recorded anywhere, but we'll go over it now. We're like an hour and a half into this video, so um, yeah, for those of you who have hung in the whole time, I hope you're finding this enjoyable. But so here's the technique, and it incorporates hand motions with words. So the words are: I am the creator of my reality. My goal is growth. Using all powers to which I am attuned, I cleanse my mind to control my thinking, my body to rid it of negativity, and my spirit to keep it light. I command all beings whose presence is not in my best spiritual interest to depart and seek enlightenment elsewhere. You basically repeat that until you believe it. And I use this one a lot. At the beginning of the pandemic, I used it multiple times every night when I was putting the children down for bed, because I could feel hungry ghosts and yeah, children children are sources of bright, unadulterated light, and so they attract a lot of attention. And during that time, children were extremely vulnerable to becoming food or fuel for dark forces and dark entities. While a lot of us were lost in our own fear and panic and concern about what was the state of the world, unbeknownst to us, our children were being attacked. So it's all part of a larger story of which our lives are a small part. And so there's no need for guilt. Um, every soul has its own journey. And as a parent, you are only one part of your child's soul journey. So if you didn't know and you have guilt, you were doing your best. And in many ways, we were all raised to be children under a very toxic parental relationship at many levels. And so perpetuating our own trauma and our own inability to stand up for ourselves and thereby to stand up for our own children, it's not our fault, but it is now our responsibility to stand up and to grow up. And so that's part of this work for me, is taking ownership of that and doing that and exposing myself and my knowledge of this world to the greater audience, the larger audience. So now let's do the meditation again. So I am the creator of my reality. My goal is growth. Flick. You can touch your skin. And if you're new starting out to this work, I strongly suggest you start touching your skin a lot. Dry brushing, swim, get used to feeling the dermis a lot. Because when lesser entities attempt to access your aura and your energetic body, your skin will react if you've cultivated it. So here, let's go again. I am the creator of my reality. My goal is growth. Using all powers to which I am attuned, I cleanse my mind to control my thinking. Flick. My body to rid it of negativity, and my spirit to keep it light. I command all beings whose presence is not in my best spiritual interest to depart and seek enlightenment elsewhere. So I'm clearing around and through my head, back of my neck, and I'm flicking off anything sticky. Then I go to my left side and I'm touching the left side of my head, my ear, my neck, my shoulder, down my arm, and I flick like I'm flicking off water. Then I go to my right side, sweep. Now you can use the words and the motions separately, or you can use them together as you like. Now I'm doing the front of my whole body, my face, my chest, my stomach, down my legs, and then flick. And just continue to do that until you feel something, feel different, feel lighter. The quality of, we're meant to feel free, graceful, buoyant, refined, fluid, like in flow, harmonious, blessed, illuminated, radiant, and beautiful, happy, healthy, and holy. Now, we all enter the valley of shadows at times, and especially when we encounter and experience trauma and grief, the loss of a loved one, um, disappointment, failure, you know. But really, these are all lessons and part of the greater lesson. And one of the greatest lessons that is available to us in this life is trust. Trust not only um, for the divine, um, which is an externalization of trust, but trust of our divinity within, which is sort of has always been there, but again, it's been kept from us. This is our birthright. Every human being that exists has the ability to rise above their circumstances, if not materialistically, um, then spiritually. Some of us um, may struggle in our material experience, and that will influence our ability, just like we were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The more we stay on that bottom rung of, am I safe? Am I fed? Will I be sheltered and cared for? And will my family care for me and take care of me? The more we live in that realm, um, the harder it is. And when we run from that to attempt to jump, uh, then that is a form of escapism. And when we escape the reality of our circumstances, the embodied reality of our circumstances, when we attempt to escape that through spiritualism, we leave ourselves open to other entities that may not have our best interest in heart. And not all of those entities are what I would call demonic. Some of those entities are of intense light, blinding light. And some of those entities may represent themselves as angels or guides or beings of light. And so we have to be careful, and we have to recognize that when someone is telling us, and you should do this with me as well, because here I am telling you, right? Take it with a grain of salt and experiment with it. What you do is you take that, whatever that is, say it's, this chat, and take something that I've said and you bring it into your sphere, and you start to, work on it in the lab. Like, what does this mean to me? And is this something I believe? And does it seem right? Does it seem true? Does it ring the bell? We all know when we're encountering something that is real and true. When we're experiencing something that is real and true, it feels like something. It feels true. It rings a bell. I remember this from forever. I don't even know how or why I remember this, but like, it rings the bell. It sounds right. It feels true. And the more you do the embodiment work, the more you are able to release the tension and get into the quality, that more refined quality of energy and energetic expression through the body and all of that. Um, the more sensitivity you'll have to things like that, things that are coming, information that's coming from the spiritual world, things that people say, and your bullshit meter will become very refined, because you'll be able to see, you won't be reacting and interacting with people and entities based off of ego and your need to defend and protect yourself and know if something is true or not true and what that means and blah, blah, blah. You'll know instantly as soon as that person starts talking, and sometimes you'll even be able to pick apart, oh, that seems like some kind of shadow, something that's not fully integrated, and they're probably not aware of that and what that is. Just bypass that and let that be that person's work, and engage with them only in the channels that you want to invest energy in with that person. Things that are life affirming, positive, things that make you both feel better and stronger and feel closer and bonded and all those things. And just recognize that that other stuff is for them to do and it's their work. And make sure if you pick up on stuff like that when you're out in the world, or you are interacting with someone that you care about, or someone maybe you don't know that well, or whatever it is, sweep your field, clear your energy. Okay, like don't absorb things that don't belong to you. Trust me, if you start doing this work for yourself, you're going to find an infinite wealth of a, a treasure trove of work for you to do on yourself. And it never ends until you die. So if you're ever wondering, gee, should I go out there and do XYZ and my friend blah blah blah, and you know, they're sure troubled and they sure need help. If you see somebody drowning and you can help them, by all means, help them. But don't sit down with them in the mud and try to convince them to get up and walk if they have their own legs and they can do for themselves. Give them the information, bless their path, and be on your way. Get people out of the most immediate danger. Plant the signs, the signposts along the way as you are moving along your way. If you're someone like me who has accepted the call to be a helper, guide, facilitator, coach, whatever, then by all means do that work. But it's very important, even more so important for those of us who have answered the call to do this work, that we know where the boundaries are, and that we keep compassionate clarity around those boundaries for, at the very minimum, for ourselves. We don't necessarily have to go to that person in the relationship and be like, well, you blah 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 blah, so I have to blah 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 blah. You just simply respond in the appropriate way, and that person will adjust in an probably from their unconscious in a way that makes sense for them, and then the relationship will change. So you don't have to go around, pulling a psychic gun on everyone that you interact with that has shadow and karma and drama and stuff going on, because what's going to happen if you do that is you're just going to end up creating a lot more drama and karma for yourself, because your work is not out there. Your work is right there. So I kind of rambled through a lot of this, but I think that I did want to say one more thing. So I have been talking about um, on social media lately, on TikTok and on Instagram, I've been talking more about elementals. Part of the reason why that came up is because um, the earth really needs us to wake up and realize that we are part of a larger system. And that larger system does include the elementals, which have an infinite function, that both create and sustain life on this earth, plant, animal, mineral, energetic life on the earth. And they also are involved in the decomposition and reintegration of life. So, elementals cover the full gamut. There's beings of water, there's beings of earth, there's beings of air, there's beings of fire, there's beings of decay, there's beings that work with insects, there's beings that work with cats, there's beings that work with flowers, and every for every different type of growing living thing there is in reality, there's an elemental energy that is um, providing an energetic container and supporting that energetic container. And the more aware we get um, of the type of energy that we can contribute, and how we can minimize any detriment that we're causing. So being an unconscious contributor to reality um, can be very destructive. When you're only operating from your unconsciousness and your fear, and your need to self-protect, um, then you're basically, you know, you're like the loose cannon that's just like, you know, or or you're operating as an NPC, um, and you're just sort of a walking, talking manifestation of stuff you hear in mainstream media, or something that your favorite politician said, or something that your favorite social media person said, and so you become less of an individual, less of who you are. You're not conscious. You're a non-player character. You're not taking ownership of all of the freedom, choice, and responsibility that you have as an individual incarnation of divine spirit and divine essence. And when we start connecting to elementals, tend to be easier for some people, and they're the closest as far as human incarnation and physical material matter. Elementals are the closest energetic expression of divinity that we have access to. So, as far as, making a connection with divinity, manifesting your intent and your attention in reality, um, working with any kind of manifestation in the material world, um, it's worthwhile to come into some kind of relationship with elementals. And the way you engage with life affirming elementals is don't unnecessarily kill. So, no more killing bugs inside your house or outside your house. No cruelty against any living thing. Accidental is unfortunate. If accidental death occurs, you can sprinkle tobacco and say a small prayer. I'm sorry. Thank you for your sacrifice. I hope your path is clear and you move on in your spirit and your next evolution. Something to acknowledge the loss of life and the necessary transition, because when when a being transitions, it releases energy and also requires energy for them to kind of move on. So, having some kind of acknowledgement of the fact that every single time I do something in reality, it affects reality. So, for example, like sitting here, I've been now here 2 hours, and that has taken time away from my time with the children and some other things that we had to do. But it was a meaningful sacrifice. And I think um, when we encounter death, um, especially death of sort of what we would consider lesser beings, like insects, rodents, birds, um, that that death is some form of meaningful sacrifice to the greater reality. And so that's why we put a little tobacco. Tobacco, traditionally Native American spirituality, is used to honor the spirit and help them transcend. You can put a little smoke, you can light incense, and just think about that entity's spirit, and kind of help send them on their way. Um, this is just a sort of, introduction to my experience and some baseline information about working in the spirit world, and sort of how that world influences our world and has. Very top level. There's lots more information available on my website, and you can follow me on social media. And again, if you have questions, please send those my way. I'd love to talk more about this and hear from anyone interested. So thanks for watching. Take care.